So this video is to show how to add volumes into a cluster. We've previously created them, we've connected them to the server, and we've formatted them. So at this stage we're going to add them to the cluster and bring them into SQL Server to use. So we're just going to follow the steps in the new environment build document. First thing we need to do is copy all the files that SQL Server needs, MDS, LDS, log files, etc. from where they were built on SQL build temp volume onto the new volume, which is the mount point volume with all the other volumes mounted on it. In this particular demo we're using an MIS server, so we'll be using the F drive. So let's just pull up Explorer and grab those volumes. So this is our mount points volume. This is a new one that we've created. We've added everything into it. Then we need another File Explorer window, which will have our SQL build temp on it, which we relabel to P. So all we want to do is take all the volumes that are on here. We can ignore the OLTP folder because that was used earlier when we were building the OLTP server. But we're basically just going to copy all these straight over to here. It's going to ask for permissions, which we can grant, and that should get all our files copied over onto the F mount points and into the relevant volumes hosted in all those folders. Yes, we can replace all those, that's fine. That's that done. We can just double check now. Let's check in system. We've got the root folder and we've got our files. We have to give permissions there, but we should see the master, model, etc. data files in there hopefully. So the permissions work their way through. There we go. So we've got all our files in there. Looks like the system copy went okay. Let's just check tempdb as well, because SQL won't start without our tempdb files. Looks like they're all there also. So that's great. The copy's completed. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to take all these folders here and pop them into a MIS folder just to archive them off really, and then we can use the build temp for building the analysis services instance later. So let's just create a new MIS folder, and then we can copy, or rather move, all these into that MIS folder, and that's it. We're done with File Explorer for now. So now we can move on to step 2 of adding volumes to a cluster, and we need to open up Failover Cluster Manager. I've already got it running down here at the bottom, and we've got the SQL instance that was previously been built and installed, and at the moment it's got this P drive on it, which is where all the data files are. Obviously we've moved all those now, so we need to get the new F drive, which are all the volumes that we've created earlier, into the cluster. So we're going to go to Storage and Disks. We will right click on Disks and just select Add Disk. Now this brings up all the disks that the cluster can see, that thinks yes, these are available clusterable disks. So these will be all the disks that we've added previously. So I'm just going to click OK, and it's going to pull all those disks into the cluster. Unfortunately, what it doesn't do is it doesn't pick up the volume labels or anything like that. So as you see, we've just got a whole bunch of disks called cluster disk 1, cluster disk 2, etc., which is not very useful. We can't see what's what within the cluster. So if we click on it though, we can actually see down at the bottom down here what the volume name is. So we can see that's MISGA sessions. What we want to try and find first is MIS mount points. So we're just going to step down, looking at the bottom until we can find MIS mount points. History, current logs, system. There we go, MIS mount points. So we can just right click on that, go to the properties and rename it MIS mount points. Now we know what it is. It's quite simple. So then we can go through all our other volumes, and we have to take an extra step here. We're going to rename it. So this is MISGA session. So we will just go to the properties here. We will rename this disk MISGA session so we can recognise it in the cluster. One additional step here is we need to add dependencies, because MISGA session is a mounted volume sitting on top of MIS mount points. So the mounted volume cannot come online unless MIS mount points is online first. So in that case we add a SQL dependency, or sorry, it's not a SQL, a cluster dependency on MIS mount points. Click OK, and then that disk, if we scroll down, we should see our MIS session and our MIS mount points, and they're both available. Now we've got to go through every other disk in the cluster, so we go Properties, rename this one to MIS Archive Indexes, and add that dependency, which will be on MIS mount points. There we go. Okay, that's that disk done. So I'm going to pause the video there while I go through and set up all the rest of those disks, because you really don't want to be watching that, and then we'll come back once that part is completed. That's all the disks added now, apart from this last one, cluster disk 21, which I believe is the backup one. So we're going to go to the properties again, we're going to rename it MIS backup. Always prefix, even if it's not in the label of the volume, prefix all MIS volumes with MIS, OLT volumes with OLTP, etc. And we add our dependency. You'll notice here how all the disks of names have been updated in here. So we just find MIS mount points and OK that. That's labelled, the dependency is set up. Next step we need to do is add our disks onto the particular role that they need to be on, which in this case is BO MIS Class 1DB. Again, nice and simple to add. We just come into here, we go right click on the server role, add storage, select all the disks. Unfortunately there is not a select all tick box, so we just have to go through, tick each disk in turn. There we go, it doesn't take too long. Click OK, and that should bring them all into the cluster. So the next step to do is to set a dependency. Now we set a dependency on those disk drives that they need to depend on mount points. SQL Server needs all the disk drives to have a dependency on, well, SQL Server needs to have a dependency on all those disk drives. Otherwise, theoretically, the instance could happen where SQL Server starts up, disk drives haven't actually come online, so some of the databases won't come online. So SQL's quite clever about this. It won't let you create a database on a volume on which it doesn't have a dependency. So if we go into the SQL Server resource, we can just go to properties again and we can start adding some dependencies. Unfortunately, again, we need to do this one at a time, but we just pick out all the volumes that have been added and add them as dependencies. And as you add one, that disappears off the list, so you can't add the same thing as a dependency twice. So it doesn't take too long just to go through and add all these disk volumes as dependencies. Almost there. Doesn't matter what order they sit in, as long as they're all on there, it means they've all got to be running before SQL Server itself can start up. So there we go, let's just OK that. Now SQL Server has a dependency on them all. Now we've copied all the files over previously. They were sitting on SQL build temp, they're now sitting, well, they've been copied over to the new F mount points and all the folders underneath that. So if everything's gone well, we should now be able to bring the SQL Server resource online. That's come on nice and quickly. We'll just bring the other resources online too. And that's great, SQL Server is started, it's up and running. Last step we can do now, now that's all running, is we can just remove SQL build temp, because SQL doesn't need to depend on that anymore at all. So we can just right click on that and we can remove from SQL Server. That will automatically remove the dependency as well. That will stick that back into the available storage pool, and there's our SQL Server, all the disks applied and sitting there running with the correct disks in the correct resource. So that's it for now.